Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Josh.
What's up, brother?
Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Oh, happy day.
You gonna sing?
Happy
Is that
day.
what's going on today?
He washed my sins away, man.
Okay.
Always good to...
You look like you've been
Watching some
washed in
Sister Act?
something. You're very damp right now.
Yeah,
Do you want to explain to anyone watching why
it's
you're...
just a warm day. I played basketball.
Extremely warm.
I played basketball. It's very humid in the church right now. And it was one of those days where you shower and you just can't stop sweating.
I feel like a little heat coming off of you.
Yeah, like
We're not in 4K, so people might not notice if they're watching, but I just felt like I had to address it in case they were worried about you. Josh, how are you doing?
Hey,
are you staying
I'm here.
cool?
I feel what he's feeling just from walking from my truck into the church.
Yeah.
And I was hoping the church would be pretty cool. And I must say, it is a little
humid.
humid in
Yeah.
here. But it's all good.
Recording this on Monday, and it is...
First
the
world
heat wave
problems.
is here,
First
right?
world problems, right?
102, so...
Here we are.
But Father's Day is upon us this upcoming Sunday. Why don't we take a quick minute? Everybody maybe share your favorite dad story. This could be about you, about your dad. Jess, maybe it's your spouse. Anybody ready to go? Anyone's got one?
I don't have like a favorite. It's just
Okay.
I just got back from vacation last week, and so we went to Colorado, and we got to go with my parents. And so there's Grandpa there, and we went to like a place like Red Feather Lakes Village. We went to Estes as well, but so it's just like one of those places. I have a lot of memories with my dad every summer, and so it's fun to take my kids up there, create memories with them. My oldest daughter, I got to go horseback riding with. So it was just like all those, and it was her first time ever. So just a lot of fun memories that you're hoping like stick. You know, our kids are on their way home and they're like, Colorado is our favorite place in the world, which they probably would have said anywhere we just went was their favorite place in the world, but it's fun for that. And so heading into Father's Day, and I got to use my Father's Day gift already. So I wanted a nice, chair that was like a rocking chair. So it has
Like the thing in front of Cracker Barrel type?
No, it's
Like a portable?
Like a portable, chair that you go camping with, but you can rock.
Oh,
But I knew this was the time I wanted to use it, so I told my wife I wanted it early, so I got to use my gift already. And thank you, children and Aaron,
so
for the gift. It was so nice to use.
That's nice.
That's awesome.
That's
There's your dad moment.
my dad moment.
Anybody else ready? Locked
I would
and
say
loaded?
for me, like I'm going to talk about Ben because I don't give Ben enough props for being an awesome dad. But one thing that like you don't want to be too freaky about before you're married is like, I just think a lot about like having kids and like being a dad. And so like not putting like all that pressure on somebody, but that was like something that was like really, really important to me. And Ben is just a great dad. Sorry. And it's just like one of those things where just to see like how he gets on their level and just cares so much about them. Ben, you're a great dad. And he very often will like apologize, and that's like so precious just to see like the love of a father to his children. And that was something that like I feel like I kind of missed out on some pieces of that. And so then just to see that like in him is just kind of some like redemption, and just to see him do that. And so I got him an awesome Father's Day gift, but this is going to air before.
So it's a surprise.
So I can tell you guys later, but
Okay.
Drop it in the
sorry,
comments later.
can't tell you, Ben, because he listens
People-
like right on the day.
Yeah,
it
if
comes
they're
out.
if they're watching right now.
Good father and a good husband.
Yeah.
Yeah. Think
It's
a
a fan.
guess the gift in the comments below. Josh, how about you? Any good dad tells?
I mean, I definitely don't want to follow that.
Yeah.
Could my wife come over here and talk about me?
Yeah, I'm sure she would too.
I mean, I feel like I don't have any specific stories, but I remember, I have 13 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
And my dad, always active, always doing stuff with us. And so, I was looking forward to becoming a dad. And I'll never forget after we had our first son and then our second son, I thought I would be a great dad. And there's a whole side to being a dad that they never tell you about. And but I honestly absolutely love being a dad of 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. And I think Father's Day has become my favorite holiday. and I love waking up in the morning. They try to bring me coffee and take care of me and make me breakfast and get me gifts. And our 4-year-old they try to hide the gifts, but she always ends up telling me what they end up giving me. And
Awesome.
so I love Father's Day. I love being a father, and I truly, it's probably one of my favorite holidays now.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was trying to think of something, and I think just overall, dads are kind of, I don't know. For me, my dad was always the one who just had the answers, right? Even if that was an unrealistic expectation now as an adult, but just as a kid, it was like I could ask Dad; he would know. We didn't have the internet when I was a kid, and so he would have the answer.
He was Google.
Yeah, I could go ask him why the sky's blue, and he would probably give me some answer. But I remember things like just traveling cross country in his conversion van, and I was sitting on a cooler in the middle of the 2 bucket seats in the front of the van, and like that's where I learned to count to 100. It wasn't in a classroom. Like he was teaching me how to count,
That's
and
awesome.
it's stuff like, and it's just like my dad is just kind of a jack of all trades. He just, he can fix your plumbing and he can drive a semi truck. He has a CDL license, that sort of stuff. And so I remember one time he made a comment about bad drivers and how he could drive his semi while making a sandwich and taking a phone call. And there's no doubt in my mind that he wasn't even exaggerating about that. Like, I'm sure he's done that at some point, been making spreading mayo on bread while driving a semi and being on his phone. So it's just one of those things where like dads can a lot of times kind of be superheroes, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think that's a really strong image for kids to carry with them.
Yeah,
So,
especially I think in our society where fatherlessness and things like that are really an epidemic. I mean, even the fact that the 4 of us can share some of those stories
Right.
and have dads that are active and as fathers ourselves, or as a mom, have a husband that is really, a great thing. And so for Father's Day, for a lot of people, the image of what a father looks like is not
Good.
is not the prettiest, or it's, mutated a little bit towards what it's actually called to do. And so we're fortunate, I think, to have that, but no, for those people that don't, that it's a difficult thing. So
yeah.
It's good.
That's awesome. All right. Up next, though, we have headlines, so stay tuned for that. All right, our headline today comes from CNN.com. It says Justin Bieber says he has facial paralysis due to Ramsay Hunt syndrome. I saw that. I follow Justin Bieber on Instagram. I saw that he posted this video, and I got to be honest, I just saw a video of Justin Bieber talking to the camera, and I just scrolled past it. I didn't even look at what it was about or anything. I follow him almost like out of a cultural obligation because I feel like I need to just know what's going on with him. But then I realized I didn't really commit to that following and didn't pay attention. Then Alex brought this video to me and it's like, hey, look what's going on. So kind of a wild story. This video he's showing, I think is it the left side of his face that is just completely numb and he can't blink his eye. He can't smile on that side of the face.
yeah, and it got me thinking mostly. Obviously, he was putting it out there because he had to cancel shows, and he's like, I gotta,
And people are getting frustrated.
people are getting mad at
angry.
him for canceling. And he's like, no, I'm not just making this up. Like, I'll put myself on. And it was weird because it was like I wasn't winking, and so like I'm like, what do you do? That's a bunny hole I went down. Like, do you have Visine? Like, doesn't your eye need to blink? How does it? Can you sleep? But those are all the things I was thinking of. But I was also like, what if, I don't know, maybe it was pretty morbid of me, but I'm like, what if like that happened? Like he's just paralyzed, that for the rest of his life, or what happened, what would happen for me in that. And so I appreciated like in his sharing of that, he's like, yeah, I need rest. I'm trusting God with this. I don't know what that's going to do. And so to me, that's one of the things I've appreciated about his journey over the last like few years. I mean, he is definitely a celebrity, but I think one that's Christian and trying to be faithful to whatever that means as a disciple, maybe better than our other friend that we've talked about on here, Kanye. He seems a little more stable than him. And so hopefully, I think
Shots fired.
Oh my!
I mean,
I like how you prefaced it as a friend, your other friend.
yeah. Well, we've had conversations about Kanye West on here.
Several.
So anyway, that those are my thoughts basically on it. It's unfortunate. It's just crazy, I think, when you see somebody that seems invincible.
Yeah.
Have something like that happen to them that's larger than life.
I think that just happens a lot of times with celebrity culture. I mean, for me, it was, I'm telling my age here, but I love Back to the Future when Michael J. Fox announced Parkinson's. Like, that was shocking to me because he was just kind of like, oh, this is a hero. Like, he's just going to be able to keep making movies or TV or doing whatever because this is who he is. And then you realize these are just people like us.
Yeah. For me, it was when Val Kilmer got throat cancer and lost his voice.
Oh, yeah.
And
that's a whole thing with the Top Gun movie. They used AI to replicate
his son,
his voice.
AI.
Yeah.
They did all kinds of new technology. But it's one of those things where I had some empathy for him for Justin Bieber, because it's like you can't just be sick as a celebrity and cancel something. Like, I could be like, hey, can't come over for dinner Friday night. But then it's also kind of the cost of being in the spotlight is when you want to be in people's lives and you want them to be invested, then you kind of owe them a video, which I think is just an interesting perspective. Did you ever experience anything like that when you were like playing for Creighton even, and just like on TV and people were expecting things of you? Or
yes and no. When I played
Sorry,
at Creighton,
I kind of put you on the spot.
When I was at Creighton, it was pre-social media.
Yeah.
Like, so there wasn't the same, I'd say, expectation for you to communicate, share things. I think you do feel, my wife and I, when we first started dating, was when I was a freshman at Creighton, and we'd be out and about and we'd be at restaurants and we'd be walking, and I was very sensitive and aware that people were watching.
Yeah.
And many times people would come up and say stuff, and most people were really good about it. But I do think there's an awareness that you live with that, man, people want to know, people are watching, obviously nowhere near what Justin Bieber goes through.
Yeah.
But I think it does humanize people. And you realize, man, Justin Bieber needs support. He needs prayer. He needs encouragement, just like the rest of us. And so, my wife, she shared that story with me, and I had a sister who went through something similar, and so I know there's some reality to it.
Well, yeah. There's any other thoughts before we move on?
That's our celebrity headline.
Our celebrity headline, yeah,
of the week.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a story that a lot of people are keeping up with, and we'll see where it heads. But all right, up next, we are going to be having a conversation that was kind of spurred by an article on Christianity Today titled "The Rise of the UMM'S." So we'll get into that here shortly. The rise of the UMM'S. That may sound like I'm speaking gibberish to some, so let me try my best to explain this. Like I said earlier, this was based on a Christianity Today article by Mike Moore. And to define it, the UMM'S are those who are described as disorientated, demotivated, discouraged, and disembodied. This is kind of defined separately from the nuns and the duns. The UMM'S are serious about their faith, but are unsure of how they want to engage with the church going forward, where you might be able to surmise that the nuns are either, atheist non-believers, or the duns are those who have deconstructed and decided to leave the church, or they're disgruntled by the church. So those are the three defining categories you might hear come up in this conversation today: the UMM'S, the nuns, and the duns. And when we say nuns, we're not talking about Catholic nuns, just to be clear. N-O-N-E-S.
Yeah, and I think those two definitions have a lot to do with like surveys like that Barna or other religious organizations will put out. And, when people are like, hey, what religious affiliation are you? There's a growing, in the United States, number of people that just say none, like there's no affiliation with any kind of religion. Or the opposite that'll come up is like people that are done are people, hey, I was, a Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, whatever, and because of the mess I've seen, because of my faith deconstruction, all those things, I'm really done with religion. So there was a religious affiliation, so they weren't just like agnostic or whatever, but they're just like, no, I'm done with it. And so I think the nuns are probably people that are like, indifferent to it, whatever. Or some are actively hating it. But I think most are like, yeah, I just don't belong to a church. The duns are probably more people that have pain points or church hurt, that they're like, they have real reasons to not appreciate the church, whether it's things that obviously have real things that have happened, situations that have happened, or loss of faith or whatever. And so I think that's where some of those two definitions come from. And this thing is kind of a new thing that he's introducing, and whether it catches on or not becomes an actual definition. I do think it's a fascinating time that we're in. And
it seems like a concept to kind of put some words or some definition around how some people are feeling.
Yeah, which in this article he talks about, as I've talked to people, like these are the things that Eric mentioned that kind of tie this group of people together. So,
well, it seems like a lot of it arose through the 2 years of the pandemic, as people have either, most of us were forced to not go to church for a period of time where we had to engage online. And you kind of saw some people either lean in that moment and really take part of the online church, or the opposite, where they just felt disengaged. And this was an opportunity for them to kind of self-examine and evaluate their, where they're at with the church.
I like how they describe the ums in this article in the sense of what you just talked about. It was, for a season, a lot of people had to take a step back. And in taking a step back with COVID and the racial injustice, people started to ask questions. And different than the dones or the nuns, the ums, based on, the way he describes it, is these are individuals who really are asking questions and maybe are hesitant to step back into what's been traditional based on what they've seen and experienced, but they're definitely not turned off by the church. And I know, just in my experience over the last couple of years, personally and relationally, I know a lot of friends who have been in this boat and in this camp, and who have just kind of stepped away and are just kind of trying to rethink about what does it look like for them to be a part of church. And some of these are individuals whose parents are pastors and leaders and they've grown up in the church. Others are people who maybe have been on the fringes. But I think there is validity to looking at this category that they've created of people who are kind of just asking different questions and trying to understand the church in a different way.
Yeah. And I think we have to admit that it's forcing churches, I think, to admit that how we do quote unquote church and how we define things like church is just culturally not always biblical, right? Yeah. So why we gather on a Sunday, even not on a Saturday, or why we gather and hear one person teach, and why there's so much of the liturgies that are happening in our Sunday gatherings aren't necessarily biblical. They're extra biblical, and they're good things and righteous things to do. But I think we're forced to think, okay, a lot of what we did, Sunday school, was to meet needs of practically educating people, not just about the Bible, but the Bible was the tool they used. There's been so many metamorphoses of the church and how we gather over time that, we want to cling to how we've experienced it, whether that's traditional hymns. It's like at one point hymns were like crazy, that it's not like Jesus was singing all the hymns that we think are so righteous. And so we have to look at, okay, this new cultural moment that we're in, with more scattered than ever, yet more gathered than ever because of the internet and all those things. We have to figure out, hey, what are things that, and we talked about this, I think, a few weeks ago with Tim Meyer, who was a vice president of our denomination, and they've moved even their mission of moving from Colorado Springs to Ohio just to be people that are on mission more. And what does that look like? And so I think over and over, the church is going to have to be honest about where we're at. What are the things that are actually biblical? What are the things that are extra biblical? How do we meet needs? And so I think probably a lot of these questions are being asked by people in the UMM'S category of like, why do we do this? Is that the best? Are there better ways to do this? Why does it have to be at this space? Why does it have to be with these songs? So I think those are legitimate things that the wave of the church we're trying to even answer right now.
Well, I feel like some of this isn't that new. Nothing's new under the sun, right? But I think in even the mid 2000s, you heard a lot of sentiment of people almost acting like it was a new idea then, but they're like, well, the church isn't the building, and they'd say it in a way of like, oh, I don't got to go to church on Sunday to be a Christian.
Right.
And they'd almost have kind of this arrogant attitude about it. And that became, I think, amongst a lot of people in at least the maybe elder millennial community, I felt like that was a pretty common sentiment. Like, well, I don't have to go to church on Sunday to be a Christian. So this idea may feel new, but I don't think it necessarily is. I think that sentiment has been around for a while. Has anyone seen this in other circles, whether that's personal or I know, Josh, you kind of mentioned you have some friends who you've seen kind of sharing this sentiment. Are there other examples we can think of?
Well, I was just going to say, I think, like, I agree with what you said. There's nothing new under the sun. I think this is something that the church has wrestled with for a while. And I think with every generation, it looks a little differently.
Yeah.
Even the language they're using. I know, the millennial generation, a lot of nuns and people kind of walking away and saying, I'm done with church. But I do think the pandemic caused a number of people to have to step away in a way that nothing else really has. When you have almost every door of almost every church closed on a Sunday morning, it gave people permission to, I think, step back in numbers that we've never seen before. And I even think of myself personally. In 2019, my wife and I stepped back from leading the church that we were leading, Bridge Church, and transitioned it to another pastor. And we were still heavily involved. But then when the pandemic hit, for a Sunday morning worship experience to happen, it required the preacher, the music team. It only required a few people who were in front of the camera. And so our responsibilities were completely taken off of, our plate. And I'll never forget the first Sunday not having responsibilities in 10 years, for the most part, for me as a leader, and sitting down with our kids. And we said, let's do church at home. And we put on some worship music, and to see our kids worshiping, eyes closed, hands lifted. And then we said, all right, let's do a message. And I said, let's talk about what is the church. And our kids described the church as where we went. And even though we've talked about that's not what the church is, the rhythms that we had established in our life and the way we were living told our kids the church was something that we actually didn't even agree with or believe in. And so I know that, for that season during 2020 and just even after, we had the opportunity, I would say, to live out some of our values with our family and take a step back from just putting on, a Sunday morning experience that caused us to ask some different questions and caused us to say, man, what actually is the church supposed to be? And then again, as I talked to different friends around, they were just in the same season asking similar questions.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I've got friends that I never imagined not like being in church every Sunday, like making those decisions, and yet they're still like I can't argue with the fact that they're growing spiritually, or maybe they're parenting better than they ever have, or I'm noticing, the fruit of the Spirit more active and alive in their lives than ever, and they've just switched up some of those rhythms. And then I've also seen people that are like, hey, man, we could only get there once every to the building, and we always felt disconnected, or like we were second class kind of citizens. And now, like, we feel like we're connected every week. I got an email this morning from someone that was like, hey, just want to say thank you. It's 8:41 p.m. We're on vacation in Indiana. And thank you for our family still being able to gather and experience, a service from wherever they're at on vacation. And so more and more people are able to see the legitimacy of that as a family. Or we've even had families that live apart. They live in Omaha, live in Washington, all those things. And they're like, because of this, we're able to gather on Zoom and watch a church service and feel like we're doing church together as a family more than we ever would have been able to. And so even some of those ways are bringing them together, but in different ways than we would have probably pitched it or we would have imagined, unless we were forced into what the pandemic forced us into in some ways. And I can't look at those people and say, your attendance is attached to your spiritual growth. I do believe that faithful attendance and, hearing messages from God's word, rubbing shoulders with fellow believers, worshiping corporately, doing things like taking communion corporately, those things do add value to our lives for sure. But you can't draw a direct parallel always to this is the best way for spiritual growth to happen. And so having those conversations with friends has been eye-opening and refreshing in some ways, especially as we reimagine what the future of the church continues to look like.
And I do think that, like you said, Josh, I think the pandemic sparked something that we had the opportunity, and like I like how you use permission, because we had the permission to kind of like to look inward. And I think one thing that these people are going through, the UMM'S, is that change is very difficult. And so it's like we're in the middle of change. But then even in reading this article, it's like the emotions are so heavy. Like if we say like, if we're saying nuns and duns, those people are probably angry or resentful. But if I'm looking at this and I'm looking at, man, these people are feeling disconnected or like asking, where's my place? That's hard. Like that's really difficult. There's like some sorrow of like, where do I fit? But I want to, and like I love the Lord. And so there's a lot of emotions wrapped up in this. And as I was reading this article, like I could really relate, because recently I quit Christ Community, and I love Christ Community, but it's just one of those things where it's like,
quit working here.
I quit.
Right?
Yeah, I didn't. I quit working here. I quit my job. I worked here.
Yeah.
For 10 years. And it's a different experience. And whether you're working or you're attending a church, it's like there's a level of commitment. There's a level of like, I'm looking in your eyeballs in a meeting, or I'm looking at you in your eyeballs like when we're in service. And it's different when that changes. And then you're kind of asking yourself in real life, like, where do I belong? Like I have the choice, like, of where to go and what to do. Like Jesus doesn't change. But I think the freedom that gives is kind of scary too, because it's like for a long time we're told like, okay, this is what we should do and this is where we should go. And I think the pandemic was like, okay, you can kind of do what you want to do. You can engage. You can look up any church that's online if you want to. And so like it's a scrambled emotional feeling of where's my commitment? And I love Jesus and I want to raise my kids to love Jesus, but I have this choice, and how do I fit? What does that look like? And so for me, I'm in real time going through that. Obviously, like we've committed to staying at Christ Community and we love it. Like that's where, and I think a lot of it is for us. Like our kids love going here. For some reason, they just love Alex and Mark. I'm on stage, but I identified with this, like this is a real thing, even though it's maybe Christianity Today article. Like this for me started putting some words around, okay, this is what you're going through and it's kind of normal. Like other people are going through this too.
Well, it's interesting that we use the term, Josh, permission to step away. And I think sometimes that can be directly connected to, I'd use the word guilt, but not necessarily, there could be other emotions there as well, but almost this obligation that church happens on Sunday, that's what church is. And giving that permission probably opened up people's minds to a different paradigm completely. Yeah. Because it's like, okay, I've been told that I have to be a good quote unquote Christian, I have to be here every Sunday. That's what this looks like. And now you're saying I don't have to be. And that kind of gives people a freedom to explore what that looks like. And so I suppose that's a lot of what we're seeing in a broader community of people than we've ever seen before.
And I'll just say for me, like as a pastor and leader, I could never imagine myself being in a season where I wasn't fully committed somewhere on Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. And even for me, probably playing a leadership role, and you sit down with people and they say, hey, I'm just in this season of transition, whether it was a pastor who got burnt out or whether it was another family. And I remember sitting down with them just thinking, I could never imagine myself being in that season. And so for us, when we step back, again, it was a season where everyone was stepping back unless you were playing a very key specific role. But the beauty was, for me, over the course of about a year and a half, being able to see other expressions too, and being able to see what God is doing at other churches. And I love how this article continues to go back and talk about how, again, these aren't people who are disgruntled with the church, who are against the church. They're actually for it. They feel guilty not being fully committed or engaged. And I think, like, there's so many benefits when we're connected to a community of people who are on mission together, but when that's the focus. And so, for me as a leader, my wife and I felt like we were dragging our kids to church. Got to get up early, got to get there. dragging them through church, trying to touch and talk to as many people as we can as leaders, and then dragging them home from church and like on to the next thing. And so for us, the rhythms of our life were just getting out of whack. But there's families that I talked to during that season who were in that space, and probably several months ago, they're saying, Josh, we're looking to get connected and commit somewhere because of what it provides our family, our children, because of what they get to experience. You talked about your family. And so the hope for me is that this is the group of people that finds solutions to a new picture of what the church looks like for this next generation as we move forward.
Yeah. And I think on top of that, we have mainline denominations that are splitting. You have, mainline denominations that have scandals inside of them right now. Not to just like call them out, but that's just a reality. And people that are connected to the church world know that and understand that. And so I think in the middle of pandemic and these arguments and denomination splitting, and then there's even more and more people I've talked to that are part of smaller communities that had a mainline denomination go and plant themselves 100 years ago in their small community. And now these people are feeling like this denomination is kind of going liberal or they're not, keeping up with the book of discipline or whatever the denomination has. And they're feeling more and more disconnected with like their beliefs and the church that they're supposed to attend. And they're like, no, I love church. This has been a vital part of raising my kids and my own spiritual growth, but I don't know what to do now that they don't represent me, or they're going a way that feels unbiblical. And so there's people in that category too, maybe that are like, hey, I haven't identified myself as like an yet, but maybe even hearing this, they're like, yeah, that's what I'm feeling. Like you said, Jess, where you're able to say, okay, sometimes it's just helpful to put words and know that I'm not alone. And when we know that we're not alone, then all of a sudden we're a part of a bigger community and we can wrestle through some of these things, and we can say, hey, me too. I'm not on an island, and it is okay. You do have permission to be there and wrestle through those things, because I think that's what has led people to be the duns, is that a lot of times the church is like, no, you don't like it, then get out. And I think that was the attitude for a lot of churches, for a long time, is like, subscribe to how we do things, show up, give this way, look this way, dress this way, act this way. And if you don't like it, then get out. And so I think it gives people permission. I like that word, like you guys have said, of exploring without guilt and knowing, there's growth and God's doing things in people's lives.
But I think we haven't had that before. Right. I mean, to me, when you're talking, I get flashbacks of like purity culture, or even being in a church that has said those things, Alex. And so it's like being in church is a requirement, and anything else is scary. And so even the shift of online church and online church, is that what you call it? Online. Like being online. That is such a new concept that even the first couple times where we had online services here and we stayed home instead of coming, I'm like, is this okay? Like, this doesn't feel right. I should be in church. But where is that coming from? Like, where is my concept of that? I don't know. It's just, there's rules around it. And I think that, okay, we need those rules. And it's not always bad to have them. But, okay, let's explore more. It's okay. I don't know, in different ways.
Well, even in 2019, we were having conversations of whether online church was a viable means of church engagement. Right. Like, was it just an afterthought, or was it really going to church? And then a pandemic strikes, and nobody was asking that question anymore, So, and I think the other side of that is when, they separated the ums into disoriented, demotivated, discouraged, and disembodied. But in that demotivated category, that's where they talk about the downfalls of, esteemed pastors, or the sins of racism and sexism that have been in the church. I mean, I think even political tension we've seen over the past couple of years has been at an all-time high, and when churches start to align politically, that causes, distrust, and people start to reevaluate. So, how is this idea of what it means to be in a church or church attendance? Like, have you seen that shift? I know, Jess, you've kind of mentioned it. The rest of us, and I guess, Josh, you kind of hit on that. Are we seeing that maybe now that we're further removed from 2020, are we seeing that change, redefined? What's it look like for us in our own lives?
I've had recent conversations with people that are like, I'm back, or I'm back in person, and some like, and we want to celebrate that in some ways, which I think is good. It's worth celebrating, but at the same time, a lot of those people never left. They were still engaged and involved, maybe online, and they found a reason to, like, maybe it is kids and being a part of kids ministry or whatever, that consistency, or they needed to wait it out for a little bit longer because of legitimate health, things. But me personally try to push against that concept of like attendance only is in person. And obviously I'm going to say that because I'm the online person here. And so I should, but I do think we've shifted in some ways our expectation and how we're even thinking of reaching people and their attendance as a church, hopefully, to be a little bit more honest about, man, if somebody is watching our service, like nobody's holding their hands. We know there's an IP address somewhere and wherever, but nobody's holding their hands, and they're still consistently showing up. Or that lady that emailed me is like, who goes to church on vacation, but she has that option. Like, that is worth celebrating for somebody. It's like, no, you weren't gone. You weren't away. People are able to be more connected than ever. I've had conversations with people that are like, yeah, I used to just skip my small group that week that I missed because I felt like I couldn't contribute to a conversation about a sermon, and they didn't really know. No, I can actually like watch online or catch up with the sermon and still show up on Tuesday night and contribute to a conversation, because I just see that as a more omni-channel, as we've talked about, approach of the church is available, or at least the tools that we put out there are available, and it doesn't keep people from actually participating in church, which is mostly a small group, looks a lot more like church than just a Sunday morning gathering oftentimes. And so people feel more connected to the church than ever because it's not just tied to like a Sunday morning attendance metric. And we're able to look people in the eyes and celebrate, hey, no matter where you're at, you're not a second class citizen for not showing up here for whatever reason it might be. And we're realizing more and more a lot of the questions of legitimacy of, well, this person lives in this town, and so it's just dumb that they're not attending another church. We've been able to ask questions and hear stories and find legitimate answers to why those people aren't connecting in a local body the way that we feel like they should. And so I think it's helped us as a church have more of those honest conversations and approach every person in a unique way and their unique circumstances to actually, and sometimes it's like, no, okay, and now you're just being lazy. And like, that's also not my hope for broadcasting something online so you can just avoid people. Because if that's why you're watching online, just to avoid people and avoid being a part of community in some kind of way, then that's not something I would say is healthy and actually participating in church. But there's a lot of people that are homebound still or whatever, and man, the chat on Sunday mornings is lively because they're able to participate and feel like they still attended without showing up to a physical space. And so that's been good, I think.
I feel like like what you just said, if we bottled it up, Alex, that's like one of the key components to the healing in when we're looking at the ums. It's like taking away some judgments, some guilt, and giving, I think, some easy connections, or even just removing whatever other thoughts you might have about church, and kind of just, I think the church online can really be a healing process as people are exploring too and figuring out, how do I want to engage and where.
It's good. And I think, Alex, you talked about it earlier in the podcast. Church has taken on different versions and forms over the years. And you take it back to just the Bible, and Jesus first uses the word church, and he was talking about people, people who were called out on mission together. And I think technology allows us to build community and be in connection with people. In person allows us to do that. I also love how the article talks about churches that are non-Sunday centric are probably the ones that the UMM'S are looking to get engaged with. And I think for years, we've talked about how can we do Sundays differently. And it's what I'll speak for myself, it's what I've grown up knowing church to be. Sundays, small groups, a little bit of outreach. And I think there's only so many things you can do on a Sunday morning. And the power and beauty of church is really being connected in that community, but also being on mission together. And I think, we have the opportunity to think differently. And I know that that's one of the things that as individuals are meeting together in smaller groups, they're thinking differently. I know the community that we're a part of now, we have a rhythm where we do what we call Sunday celebrations twice a month. We serve once a month, and then we meet kind of more in a small group type environment once a month. And the serving days, we'll serve, and our kids will say, "Are we going to church?" and we say, "We just had church." And again, our children, my children, who I've tried to, share different things with and help them understand what the church is, still have a hard time understanding that when we are together as a community, when we're serving our community together, we are doing church. We are living out the mission of God together. And so I think there's such a paradigm that has been embedded into our lives, our systems of how we do things for so many generations. It's hard to escape that. And, I think this season has given us an opportunity to reimagine and rethink. But I know for many of us, myself included, it's easy to just do what we've always known to do. And I love what the article said about, non-Sunday centric churches and just how people, I think there's more ways for people to get engaged too and get connected.
Well, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about online church as an alternative, but I think a lot of the discontentment that came from many of the UMM'S was this doesn't feel like church to me. This worship doesn't feel the same, or like Alex mentioned, communion or things like that. So finding these other community aspects for people to get engaged. I mean, I think this author of this article also kind of commissions people to, or even challenges churches to actually have more, look at a map of all of your congregants and have that be the church. Look at that. That's their homes, and inviting people into your neighborhoods and communities and be the hands and feet of the church in those areas. And I think that's important, because a lot of times we'll have like a technological solution to a problem and sometimes go, okay, well, this is the ultimate solution, right? Like we fixed it, and because it's new or it's flashy or whatever. And it's like, well, there is still people that are going to feel this discontentment. And I think a lot of that is because I think younger generations especially want to see the good that's happening. And the church has traditionally been where people go for help. And I think we're starting to see that turn around. Again, let's revisit the 4 categories described in this of the UMM'S, and that's being disorientated, demotivated, discouraged, and disembodied. Do any of these, like as we discussed this and we've kind of related to the UMM'S, do any of us feel like those kind of ring true to us, where we've landed a little bit like, okay, yeah, I kind of align with that. I love the alliteration of the D words. That's always important in any
I feel like,
I
think it's the description of demotivated. I don't like that language.
Yeah.
I would never call myself demotivated.
Yeah.
But I think that's the one that talks about just some of the challenges that our world faces. And for me specifically, some of the racial challenges and injustices that I think were highlighted over the course of the last couple of years. And I know there's been a lot of conversations, talk. There was a lot of, protests during those seasons. For me, my greatest challenge, my greatest hope is that the church would be at the forefront of those conversations and action. And, we get to work with a lot of different churches in our city, and there were some that definitely said, man, we want to get in the game, we want to be a part of the solution, we want to have conversations, we want to move forward. But there were also a lot of churches where I think good intentions, but and I get this, man, there is a risk involved in taking significant steps towards whether it's racial reconciliation, whether it's becoming a more diverse conversation, whether it's going after issues of social justice. There's a challenge there because of the division that we saw take place within the context of churches. So I get the challenge. I just, in many ways, felt like the church was lagging behind in many of the different areas when it came specifically to the conversation in areas of race and justice, and it didn't seem like we were able to take the place, because for me, the world, the culture that we live in, people are going to have views, perspectives. Culture says, man, I got to do what's best for me. I've got to, make sure that I'm covered before I help somebody else. And while there's risk, while there's sacrifice, as the church, we're the ones that are called to love people regardless. And when the Bible talks about loving your neighbor. And so that was the one that I would say spoke to me personally. And also I would say because of the role that I'm in and what we do, probably I've had the most people come to me and share a similar discontent or a similar heart for the church.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the discouraged, and it talks about the weight of suffering and the collective grief over the last few years has discouraged a lot of people. They're struggling with their mental health, struggling with motivation. Family members have died, or maybe not physically died, but relationships have died because all of a sudden over the last few years, because of those, racial tensions and because of, buzzwords like Black Lives Matter or CRT or poor understandings and communications of these types of things, it's like we want everybody to draw a line in the sand, and we want people in a church to draw a line in the sand, and then masks, you throw that into the equation, and a vaccine and all of those things. It feels like, man, these people that I thought were really smart people, these people that I thought exactly like me, these people that I thought were just as smart as I am, like if somebody doesn't think the way I do about this issue, or they don't have this hashtag, or if they don't put this Facebook profile ring around their photo, or if they did it or didn't get vaccinated, all of a sudden it doesn't kill people, but it kills a lot of those relationships, because I think that everybody should be thinking like me, and those who aren't thinking like me, all of a sudden, because of the polarization, I'm like, yeah, these are dumb people. And why would I want to associate with these people? Like, right. How could I be on mission with these people? And they're the same people that for the last several years I've been on mission with. But so inside of me, there's been a lot of that discouragement of, relationships that have been cut off because of maybe voicing an opinion about something or not, or just people unwilling to have conversations about these peripheral things, or just realizing, man, we're being fed information and information news sources and all of that by what we're clicking, and we probably think a lot more alike than we actually are, but we get caught up on semantics and specific words or agendas. And obviously an election happened in the middle of all of that, which was polarizing. And so there's been so many places for us to have to identify and raise a hand. Yes, I believe this way. Yes, I believe this way. And if we believe differently about 3 of the 6 things, then we can't gather together. And that's the unique thing about the church, is we're supposed to be. It's always been that place, but a lot of that was just uncovered over the last few years, and we couldn't hide it as much anymore. And so then people were drawing boundaries in the sand. And so there's just been so much discouragement with me of like, you're going to end the relationship over that? Like you're going to stop coming here over this song, or whatever. And there are areas that people should be passionate about and should have thoughts, but just the unwillingness, I think, to sit down around a table and have conversation and dialogue around those things, which is why I'm so passionate and grateful that we launched this right before the pandemic. Is it's given opportunity to address some of those things and hopefully model how to have dialogue, even though you don't agree in all those spaces, and say, man, the kingdom, the mission that we've been given is far too important to let some of these and very serious, honest things. So I don't want to say none of them are serious or, and that's the balance. It's like, well, then you're just dismissive of those things. And so how to articulate and what to stand up for and all those things, it's just become so exhausting and discouraging and heartbreaking to see some relationships literally end over that.
Well, I think so many times we talk about the church and we talk about capital C church, but if we're actually talking about the church and we are referring to it in the way that it is us, that we are the church, and we really believe that. I mean, there are some churches who might see that as a threat and go, oh, wait, well, if they're the church, then do they need me? But I think if we really were to take that perspective and actually believe that, then the things that we're most critical of are going to be the things that we find in ourselves. Because if we are the church, then we are the billboards for, was supposed to be what Jesus looks like, and if we're not doing that or living up to those standards, then a lot of the onus falls on ourselves. And I think as we live that life out, and I think, Josh, some of your examples have been so great of, teaching your kids to see the church differently. I think as we live that out, it's going to become more and more evident who the church really is. And that small communities are going to spring up. You're going to see high schoolers build a community on TikTok where they're talking about these things, or they're having these really tough conversations. They're bringing up questions that are they're not going to feel comfortable bringing up in a official church setting, but they are in these communities where people are actually living out the church and being the church and answering those questions and accepting people for who they are and hearing them out and understanding their concerns and really living that life together, which it's not just a catchphrase at that point. It's something that's actually happening.
I think for me, I identified most with just the disorientation, being disoriented of all the changes that have come from the past 2 weeks. I think that's where a lot of my close relationships are too, that are kind of struggling in the same area. And I think a lot of change has come, but like something for me that's just been very healing. And I think if we're like looking at this and this is where you're at, like the verse that says, come to me all who are weary and I will give you rest. And I think it's okay to be where you're at. It's not okay to stay there. And I think it's okay to lament and to be sad and to ask questions and to ask God the question, like, what, where do you want me? Lead me, like, speak to me, ask for a fresh filling of the Holy Spirit. I don't think that those are old timey things as we kind of pioneer into this new place in life. I think that the God's truths don't change. And I think that that's where our hope and our healing is. And I think like more than anything, like that's something that I'm saying to, I guess, anybody listening, but I'm like saying that to myself too, as a truth that we can hold on to when we do feel these things.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, as we start to wrap things up, what are some ways that we see the church, whether we're talking about capital C or ourselves, are addressing these issues and helping form this and shape this and dream about this for the future? And what do we think the church might look like in the future? Will it be different? Will it be the same? A little both?
I think here at CCC, like I said, I think it's just language things. It's a big ship, and it's hard to turn a big ship as quickly as I'd like. But consistently having those conversations, just calling out differences. I mean, using words like digital immigrants and digital natives, and just saying we're different. We can't understand each other fully because you'll never understand. Like my kids will never understand what it's like to grow up without an iPhone. They won't, Right. Even like you were sharing like playing basketball at Creighton without social media, And I know you've got a younger brother that's pretty good at basketball, and he's probably going to. it's fully different. Like you can guide him in some of those ways, but in some of it you just can't. And that's
right.
Like 10 years removed, you know, a little more than that. And so just calling out some of those differences and saying one is not wrong or one is not right. I think, you know, some of the steps we've taken in unifying services, though it's painful for people, it's actually like, you know, our DNA statements, we are contributors, not consumers. And so much of church, how we've done it in the building on a Sunday, has allowed people to be consumers and not contributors. And we've given a lot of options for preferences. And so there's a lot of pain and painful conversations, but I've seen people, you know, stick through some of their preferences, you know, not always happening. And that's difficult. It takes dying to ourselves. It's like Jesus asked us to pick up a cross and to be humble, and we haven't had to actually call people to that as a church, you know, Big C Church and even here in a while. And so I think we're doing that more and more, and people are able to see that. We're, you know, not hopefully communicating that somebody that's listening online 3 or 4 weeks and here 1 week are lesser Christians or believers. And so I think those are some of the things that I'm hopeful for. I think Christian colleges are being innovative in ways that they're trying to educate people. I'm seeing more and more, even of our residents, saying, man, I think bivocational ministry is what God's maybe calling me to in those next waves of ministry. And more churches just aren't centered around a one personality. Like, as I'm seeing friends plant churches and churches being sparked more and more, I think we're seeing churches not just be built on the name or the brand of a person. And so that when that name or that brand fail us, because they're humans, then the church doesn't collapse. And so those things give me hope that the church is thinking about these and trying to turn the ship a little bit and continue. And also gives me hope that, you know, Jesus said that the gates of hell will not, you know, prevail. And so
that's good.
I've got some hope in that promise, even though sometimes it feels like the darkness is pushing a little bit more than the light. We have that promise to cling to, that, man, there's been a lot of messes the church has made in history, but for whatever reason, God is still using this as the vehicle for his mission to be accomplished. And
so good. Yeah. And I would say, I agree with that 100%. And it's God's plan A to affect the world that we live in. And I think it's easy, you know, you read an article like this and it's easy to start using language like this, and it's easy to start saying we have to rethink everything and change everything. And I think every generation, God's always doing a new thing. And we're answering different questions. We're meeting different needs for the church. And I love what, Jess, you alluded to earlier, and I would encourage people in this too. Different than my perspective would have been a couple of years ago, but it's like, if you are in that season, use it as an opportunity to grow. You know, use it as an opportunity to visit other expressions. Use it as an opportunity to allow God to break your heart and open your mind to new things. And I think the key is don't take a step back. You can actually, in this season, take a step forward. I'm excited because I think there are new waves of new things coming out. I think local missions is becoming more and more on the forefront of more churches, because it allows us to mobilize the most people in our church to be contributors and not consumers, and to really get engaged in causes that are at the center of God's heart, but also at the center of the minds and hearts of our neighbors and people in our city that care about things. And so I think the church is thinking more, how can we mobilize more people and not just create meeting spaces? How can our rhythms not compete with our values? We value outreach, we value family, we value different things. But so often, again, if we just build off the traditional model, man, with Sundays and small groups and our activities, we might value these other things, but our rhythms are actually competing with those values. And so I think more people are thinking about how can I, because of COVID, because we could step back, how are the rhythms of my life and of the church I'm engaged in not competing, but completing the values that I feel called to live out? And so I think somebody wrote this book called Church in Crisis during the pandemic. Amazing author.
Yeah,
I forget
yeah.
what his name
It's like
was.
Schmotzler or something like that.
A title that nobody wants to buy the book. But one thing that I wrote was crisis can be a catalyst for change if we allow Christ to be in the crisis. And I really believe that. I think the last couple of years, God wants to use those crisis moments to change us and to use us to change the world. His church is never going to die, but we have to change and get on board with the new thing that I think God is doing.
It's good.
So good.
And I think one of the things that stands out to me as we look forward into the future is just the church as a whole. And people, I had this tough conversation with my son about a year ago where he's like, you know, he's kind of hanging out with maybe the wrong crowd at school, and he's like, the teachers just think I'm bad, you know, they think I'm bad, you know, and I'm like, well, you got to prove to them that you're not, you know, and they're not going to just believe you by saying you're not a bad kid. You got to do, your actions are going to prove different, you know, and I think so much of people who are on the outside looking in at the church and deciding how they want to engage is the church can't just be this institution that says it's holy. Like if we're not doing things that demonstrate our holiness to the community and our love to the community, they're not going to believe us. And so I think as the church of the future, I'm excited to see a church that is maybe a little more humble, a little more willing to admit and say, hey, we need forgiveness for these areas where we've messed up, and also a lot more actionable where we're actually out there and people cannot deny the impact that the church is having in its communities around us. So I think the future is hopeful, and I really I just want to say thanks and appreciate everybody that's here in this conversation, this candid, honest conversation. Josh, thanks for your time, for coming in. It's really good. And if you have any questions or concerns, you want to reach out to us, you can do that on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.